The Africa Roundtable, a podcast by the Global Perspectives Initiative.
The world is once again talking about the climate because of the current annual UN Climate Change Conference, which this year is being held in Glasgow. We have heard the voices of both the German federal government and the US government, as well as those of Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron. And of course, Greta Thunberg has also had her say in public. But what do those directly affected by climate change, the representatives of Africa, for example, have to say? Today we speak with a non-governmental voice about the climate change from an African perspective. And with that being said, a warm welcome to the second season of our podcast, The Africa Roundtable, with Danilo Höpfner at the microphone. Today we are talking with Wanjira Mathai. Wanjira is the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at World Resources Institute, WRI. Hello Wanjira, nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Wanjira, your mother, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Wanjira Mathai, and yourself are both inspiring examples of strong women who have stood up for climate protection. How was it for you growing up with an activist mother? To what extent has it shaped you who you are today and your determination?
What a lovely question. Yes, I was very lucky to have a strong woman role model in my mother, and certainly even better, the fact that we worked so closely together for so many years. But you know, what's interesting is you never expect that will be your role model. You don't think about it that way. It just becomes a part of you, and it becomes a part of your life. So that, I would say, is how it has been for me. And working with my mother and for the last 12 years of her life, really quite closely on a daily basis, I would say it influenced a lot my life. I was privileged to see and watch her work and think and struggle with ideas and activities, but also just to understand just how profound her commitment was, how clear her vision was. And that's so important to have a deep sense of purpose. And that, I think, was one of the greatest gifts, is just having that clarity, to see that in her and to feel that in myself. I also needed to be in constant pursuit of where I felt I could leverage most my talents, my expertise, but also where I would feel really fulfilled.
Let's talk about the climate and the climate change. There is no scientific doubt that we will see major changes in the climate in our lifetimes. How do you best explain to the people that change is necessary? Changes for each of us also in our private life.
Yeah, it's one of those very difficult things sometimes when there's so much. It's a political discussion constantly. We are talking about climate and climate change, and we so rarely are making the connections to everyday life. But one of the ones that is so clear and so stark is the impacts of extreme weather impacts. Of extreme weather events. We have seen some of the worst extremes or some of the worst weather events in the last year, even. In the last year, almost across the world, we are continuing to see from some of the richest countries, Germany and the United States, flooding, fires of very high proportions. What happened in Texas with the deep freeze. And then, of course, in Africa, we are seeing amazingly unbelievable flooding. In Sudan, the worst flooding in 60 years. Then you go to Asia, and the same. We are experiencing already some of the most devastating impacts, loss of lives and loss of property. What I like to say to people is, imagine that 1,000 times worse, because not capping temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, that increase to 1.5 degrees will spell disaster. And in places that we already know, places like Nigeria, I saw a story recently that in Nigeria, temperatures could go up 100 times and more. In January in Cape Town, 2018, we saw they were within 90 days of running out of water. Imagine what that means. The impact that Cyclone Idai had on life. I don't think we need to tell people right now that it is. But we need to keep reminding ourselves. And I think the media is going to be a crucial player in helping us hammer this message home, because it's now an emotional discussion. It's no longer a scientific question. The science is clear.
What sort of sacrifices should people, especially those living in developed countries, be making in order to save a world worth living in?
Well, I think in developed countries, a fossil fuel future has got to start going into the back seat. There's going to have to be significant shifts in energy and energy resource. The preference for renewable energy, the subsidies will have to start going to renewable energy and not fossil fuels. You will have to see people investing. I think one of the biggest stories of this last few years will be the divestment, the fossil fuel divestment movement. They have seen the divestments of trillions of dollars to date. This is the sort of thing that people in developed countries will have to do. Will start saying no to fossil fuels. They can, because they can actually afford to make the sorts of investments that are required in electric mobility, in mass transit, in electric cooking in ways that most developing countries cannot. So we hope that they will step up to the plate, because after all, a lot of the emissions and the burden of reduction sits with the biggest emitters in developed countries.
We've spoken to Kumi Naidoo, an environmental and social activist and the global ambassador of an African-wide social movement called Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. My colleague Christine Mundra spoke to Naidoo in Berlin these days. Let's hear what he had to say about climate change and climate justice.
So first, to understand climate justice, we have to understand climate injustice. And the injustice that we see is that those parts of the world that actually contributed most to carbon pollution and other forms of greenhouse gases are not the ones that are paying the first and most brutal price. Africa as a continent has contributed minimally to emissions and are paying the first and most brutal price in terms of a large concentration of countries. So we are seeing droughts, we are seeing flooding. Mozambique, which is a neighbor to me in South Africa, for the first time in Southern Africa, I heard of a cyclone, 2 years ago, which just almost wiped out Beira, which is a large city, and also had impact in Zimbabwe and so on. So, in fact, when we then talk about climate justice, is how do we address the challenge of climate in a way that seeks to reverse some of these patterns of injustice. So, for example, when Africans and people from the global south more generally are saying that we want the commitment made in 2009 at the climate negotiations in Copenhagen of $100 billion a year to support poor countries in terms of adapting to climate change and so on. We are not asking for charity. We are saying pay your climate debt, because those rich countries built the economies on dirty energy. And the truth is, climate injustice is not the most graphic way to describe the problem. A more accurate way is to name the problem as climate apartheid, because those parts of the world that actually contributed most to the problem look in a particular way, and those parts of the world that are suffering the most look in a particular way. So predominantly white population countries and predominantly people of color is what you're seeing, right?
Kumi Naidoo, serious and hard terms. Wanjira, does the term climate apartheid accurately describe the problem? What do you think about this term?
Well, I think it definitely does. I think it's an effort to describe the unjust nature of the climate injustice, as Kumi put it. And then, of course, the reality that a majority of those who are suffering are in the global south. They're people of color. And if you go into countries, even within countries of high wealth, you will find that those who are disproportionately affected by climate injustice are people of color. You look at the US, you look at Europe, you look at different parts of the world. Color and ethnicity seem to be the ones affected more. And wealth, obviously, the economic wealth, are often always the indicator of those who suffer most, of those where dumping is done. So it is a pretty clear way of putting it. It's graphic. It puts into center stage the seriousness of the issue. So I think he's right. I think Kumi is absolutely right.
How to transform food systems in face of climate change is one of the topics of your institute. WRI claim, better food systems, better world. Is it really that easy?
Well, it's not that easy in the sense that it is true, better food systems, better food systems, better world. But what that means is we have to transform the systems of how we produce food, how we transport food, how we trade in food, and that's not an easy task. What we have to do is understand the problem. And I think as soon as we start to understand that it is a problem of the food systems, then we begin to address it. But definitely, it's a mammoth task, but one that we absolutely have to address if we're going to get to what Kumi was talking about: justice, peace, and equality.
Wanjira, thanks for everything so far. We'll be back in a moment.
New perspectives, insights, and global analysis. Subscribe to the free newsletter by GPI, the Global Perspectives Initiative. globalperspectivesinitiative.org.
And with that, welcome back to the Africa Roundtable. Today with Wanjira Mathai, the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at World Resources Institute, WRI. Wanjira, women are usually much more affected by the consequences of climate change, especially environmental disasters. But women also have to be part of the solution. All over the world, women are typically responsible for taking care of the housework. Clean cooking has recently become a popular phrase in the climate debate. What does clean cooking mean exactly, and can it be a way to encourage women to participate in environmental protection?
Yes, clean cooking is a really crucial part. We have to remember that food and food systems are responsible for 30% of global emissions. So we have to fix the food systems. One of the things that we know for sure is the burden of cooking in most homes will rest on women, especially in developing countries where women are the custodians of food production, whether on farms or even in the food processing in kitchens. Almost 80% in my part of the world of cooking is done on open fires, using firewood or charcoal. Biomass energy is still the predominant source of energy. We know the impact on health, on human health, because of particulate matter and the pollution, but it is also a significant part of increasing greenhouse gases. We know that we have got to change the way women cook if we're going to protect their lives and the lives of their children. And so this is a very crucial part. A lot of deforestation in many parts of Africa, certainly some of the smaller forests, are driven by charcoal production. But it's not always the small charcoal producers who are using branches and twigs. It's also the commercial production of charcoal, which is often illegal and using quite a large amount of protected forest areas for charcoal production. That is the problem. But there is a direct relationship towards forest degradation and the production of charcoal and firewood for cooking. That demand makes clean cooking a very important agenda. And what that means is, how can we support women to transition from cooking on open fires and on charcoal predominantly to a place where they have choices. They have choices of gas. They have choices of electricity, just like you and I would. At the moment, most of them don't have any choice.
Deforestation, you have mentioned it. Let me ask, how important is reforestation and climate protection in Africa?
Really important. We know that nature protection is more than a fifth of the solution to climate. Protecting our forest and green vegetation has significant benefits. The integrity of forests, we know, directly linked to the integrity of water, food, energy in so many countries. So absolutely crucial is that we protect nature, and nature-based solutions become part of how we address the climate problem. Now, there's a wonderful movement in Africa that is currently underway, AFR 100. I think AFR 100 presents one of the best examples of how African governments have banded together under the umbrella of the African Union to begin restoring 100 million hectares of land across the continent. They know that without those green vegetation and green forests, that climate change will continue to be a devastating part of their reality, because forests play such an important role. Trees play such an important role as carbon sinks. So absolutely. But not only that, we know that reforestation also presents great opportunities for job creation, especially among entrepreneurs, youth, women who are very adept at farming as well. And they would be part of enjoying new opportunities if this movement takes off. So absolutely multiple benefits coming from forest restoration.
The WRI is based in Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia. Have you noticed any climate-related changes in the region of East Africa?
Absolutely. We've suffered significant impacts of climate so far. I think you'll remember East Africa suffered for a significant amount of time from locust invasion. These invasions of locusts often do not come this way, but because of climate, because of the changes of wind and the changes of weather patterns, they devastated crops from Ethiopia all the way down the East African coast. We have flooding of high proportions going on now in countries like Sudan, where we have never seen the sort of devastation they're seeing. The same is happening. Kenya is currently going through a drought that is now a national disaster, 2.1 million people at risk of going hungry. Definitely East Africa is on the front lines of climate disasters.
Wanjira, finally, the WRI has a new partnership with the global food company Nestle. Nestle stands like no other company for the commercialization of natural resources. Yet there has been strong criticism of Nestle's water privatization, especially in Africa. Is Nestle, therefore, the right partner for a World Resources Institute?
I have to tell you that I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I think that program must be in the US for sure. I don't think that we have a partnership here in Africa. So unfortunately, I don't have the details of that. However, I think it's very important for companies like Nestle and for companies that are involved and benefit from resources to ensure that they too are part of the solutions. One of the programs that I know is going to be crucial for companies like Nestle and other corporates is the Science-Based Targets Initiative, an initiative that ensures that they do not engage in greenwashing, but that they go through very rigorous assessment of places in their value chains, in their supply chains, where they can get, where they can tighten and become more sustainable and green. I hope that Nestle will sign up to the Science-Based Targets Initiative if they haven't already.
Wanjira Mathai, the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at World Resources Institute. Wanjira, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can find more information about the Institute and its positions on climate change on the website wri.org. And more on the subject on our website, the Global Perspectives Initiative. They will also find all of our other podcasts from the Africa Roundtable. On a side note, in addition to the English version, you'll find a German version, which can be found on all common podcast platforms. Many thanks to the colleagues at the GPI, with very special thanks to Christine Montois, business journalist, and Nora Kiefer from the Africa Roundtable for the fantastic support with this edition and season. And thanks to you for listening. Daniel Höpfner was at the microphone.
The Africa Roundtable. This podcast is a production of the Global Perspectives Initiative.